and it's really easy to turn on. Okay, so it's 12:15. I'm gonna get started here in a minute, but I'm having people say what experience they have with Decoupled Drupal. So I can it looks like there are enough people here that maybe have very little experience with Decoupled Drupal that I'll just pitch the talk kind of in general a little bit more that way. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Erin Rasmussen, and I work at Aquia. I was a developer for a long time before I worked at Aquia, but I'm not a developer now. I work with our teams to help support enterprise size sites as they work with delivering their Drupal and Decoupled Drupal experiences out to the site visitors on the internet. So this is going to be pitched a little bit DevOpsy, and it's kind of that way on purpose, just because I think that is a part of the story that we don't tell very often. So this is Decoupled Drupal in real life. It's really neat. It's really fun to do as a demo. You turn on JSON API and you build a front end, and it works really great. But what does this start to look like as we deliver it? And then also, what does this look like as we deliver it in scale? And what kinds of things that we've learned that other people can learn? The other thing is, I've noticed in other sessions that some people have had difficulty as slides advance, so just keep refreshing. It really helps to see the next slide. So switch. There we go. Oh, I'm back. So this is kind of like my intro slide. I spoke at DrupalCon Seattle. We talked about caching. Decoupled Drupal was on the radar. There were a lot of people that had really great projects, but we didn't have a lot of projects we were seeing kind of out there in the wild yet. And I really feel like we started from the beginning stages of Decoupled Drupal, and we're now sort of hitting the teenagery stage where we're seeing more of these projects delivered, and visitors are accessing them, and we're getting more experience with being able to deliver these sites at scale. So I have kind of the infant there. In March 2019, JSON API was in Drupal core. Pretty soon after that, Varnish support was added for JSON API, and that's one of the key things that I'm talking about. So part of what I want to talk about when I'm talking about Decoupled Drupal isn't just the fact that you have a Drupal 8 site and you have a front end, and you're using your front end to deliver content to the web, or you're using your front end in Gatsby or Tome to create a static site and then deliver that to the web. Part of what I'm seeing our customers use and people use Drupal on the platform, on the internet, is this move toward using your Drupal 8 as a content aggregator, or using migration, using other tools, APIs, to be able to pull in content from other sources, whether that's social media, product and information systems, or e-commerce systems. Sometimes people have product customer data platform information they're using in Drupal. And then also, you consuming that content in a variety of ways, right? You might be consuming it in a Decoupled front end, or a static HTML front end site, or you're maybe sending that piece of content from Drupal out to your marketing channels, or you're sending it pieces from Drupal about your product and your information that you want to share out through social media channels. So Drupal's playing this role of a hub almost, or a content aggregator between all these different systems and then out to out to the consumers, whether they're choosing to go through a regular website, through an application, or through some other software that consumes that information. It's really interesting. And I love the way that people are using Drupal in these like new, more dramatic ways, because it's using the API system and it's using those content types and the way that you can be flexible about the way you set up data and then having it go out and then having it come in. So the first project we'll look at is a really kind of more fully decoupled website. So this is Union Bank. They did a beautiful website, and I'm really hoping that at some point the developers do a public talk about that project, because it was really great. Their site's really gorgeous. I'm going to talk a little bit about just the back end from that, like when a customer visits the site or when a site visitor visits the site, what process that request can go through before it delivers the final result to that same viewer. And I think that's helpful because I think it helps you understand where the caching layers may be. And we found, you know, with delivering like at an enterprise scale, caching is really this key to success. So with Union Bank, why did they choose to go decoupled? Well, they were able to build in some security and performance features that help the visitor to their site. They're very security conscious because they're a bank. They get separation of concerns from like their JavaScript front end touches one part, right? And then the Drupal back end has a different permission system and has a different access level. So that's important to have things separated out. They also decided to choose to use a web application firewall and CDN on the front end. So they've got site visitors that come in, the web request comes in. It may be that it is just the homepage and there's nothing, and it's been requested a billion times and it's saved in the CDN and that response goes out right away. So that's the first caching layer. Maybe it is a detailed page or there's some customization that's required. So they go to their, in this case, it's a Vue JavaScript application. That's the front end and it builds the request. If that needs additional information from Drupal, it sends a backend request to Drupal. That might be cached in a caching layer, or it might be built in Drupal and then sent to the front end, where it's assembled into a page and it goes out to the site visitor. It's a little bit complicated, but it's kind of like that series of steps. When you see it more simply, you see it like visitor has a request, goes to the front end system. If the front end system needs something from Drupal, grabs that request, builds it in Drupal, sends it back to the front end. That usually packages the visual layers, accessibility things, any additional tags it needs to add if it's sending not just to a website, but to like a screen, or some people use these for, like, for example, in banks to be the display screens. So you have that like packaging information you can also put into the JavaScript front end and then send that request back to the site visitor. Throwing in those caching layers, and at least to like the front end caching level layer where you are doing that security step of having the web application firewall, it speeds the delivery of those prepackaged things and gives that instant site experience, like instant view that site visitors really like. And you get to keep all your gorgeous pictures and your formatting, and it's pretty great. This is just kind of another cut on the same information, right? Site visitors go through, goes to the WAF CDN layer. Maybe some of those requests are handled there. Then the rest of them go into the decoupled application. That'll handle a few more of them. Not all of those requests will go to Drupal. the ones that do, if you're using JSON API and you've enabled caching, you can cache the responses in Varnish, and that also helps you lighten the load on Drupal. In addition to that, there are database caches, like fast caches, like Memcache or Redis. And then also PHP has like a small caching system on it. It's kind of important to know these things a little bit to understand where you can introduce optimization, but also you can have errors that crop up or parts of the screen that don't render correctly. And so it's nice to know where to look in case you have a glitch, or it's nice to know which cache you have to clear. You can do, okay, so in this diagram, just to answer the chat, the node is doing server-side rendering. And then that's why you can do a cache in front of it. And yeah, like Simon says, you can put the backend on a different subdomain, and that helps. So you have the one request going to the other subdomain. And they are on two, the ones that I've seen are usually also on two different hardware layers. So you can have one level of provisioning for the server-side rendering, and then another one for the Drupal stack, because they like to be on different software stacks. This just is kind of like, if you haven't checked your caching layers with curl, it's really handy. It just tells you what's happening in the browser. But it's super nice to kind of just take a look at the header information. If you see that Drupal dynamic cache hit, that got a Drupal cache hit, it'll show you if you're using Varnish or if you're using Cloudflare, what the cache age is. So that can help you figure out why you're still seeing something stale or not. And then also another thing to kind of watch out for is that usually there's like an Xcache header, and the Xcache header usually only tells you about the nearest caching layer to where you are. And that might not be the caching layer where like something like I was talking about before, like an asset is getting stuck in. So let's kind of how to introduce this because it's really handy. The curl man page is really great, and you can also look at all that in your inspector in Chrome or Firefox or any of the main browsers, but sometimes it's nice to just kind of have it like a static readout and then be able to refer to it later. So with this site, like the main lessons, key takeaways were things like when you build the beautiful front end site experience, it's also good to take some time and build a beautiful web editor experience. That was really one of the things with this project that was really important. Because the stakeholders that were at the bank that were invested in this project really like to see the gorgeous front end experience, but then they took a look at the same content in Drupal, and this is what this is showing you. It's kind of like the front end page, which is really nice, and then the back end page, which is very Drupal-y. And I gotta tell you, they weren't that excited about it. So if you take the time, or if you're looking at a fully decoupled project, don't do a fully decoupled project just for the sake of doing decoupled because they take a lot more time. But if you are working on a decoupled project, do something that sometimes we call like partially decoupled, or like, I'll just give Chris Teitzel, if he's around, I know he's a DrupalCon, give him credit for this way of saying it, but mimic the front end experience inside Drupal. And it does take extra time and it does take extra resources to do it, but they will be your, the people who are working on your project like day to day, having to live with the web development will be a lot happier with it. So we found that some of these fully decoupled applications really go progressively decoupled just to improve that building experience. The other issue, this was an early stage project, and it uses its paragraphs pretty extensively. An issue that came up a lot, especially when trying to render a really quality draft, is that there are some paragraphs issues with nested fields. Like paragraph does this thing that's kind of like a Russian doll, right? You've got the big field and then like an image, and then maybe the image has details about it, and maybe that link gets updated or the original base image gets updated. When you do that, there's a revision entity attached to that, and it doesn't always bubble up to that main entity. It does pretty well for nodes, but custom content, additional content types has a harder time. So just be aware of that if you have a project that's using JSON API or REST API and paragraphs. Also, check out for observability in JavaScript application. If we work with Drupal a lot, we're really used to Drupal logging, and Drupal does a great job of logging. And you don't miss Drupal logging until all of a sudden you're working with a front-end application and you haven't built the same level of sophisticated logging and something goes wrong. So either build really good logging or check into observability apps like New Relic or Honeycomb. Those really can help in the case of things go wrong. That's another part where it's like harder to talk clients into really spending money on logging parts. But when the site is in production, it is one thing you really appreciate. Also, if you can build in a local cache. Oh, hey, look, Rudolph has a logger too. So there are definitely good loggers out there. Take advantage of it. And also, if you can build in a local cache to, if you're doing server-side rendering with JavaScript, if you could do a local cache, that helps a lot in terms of speeding the delivery of your site to the end user. So that's the bank site. That's kind of like, those are the key things. That was a lot. The next project I'm going to talk about is, I don't have any screenshots of, it is still in the proof of content phase. What they're doing is aggregating data from Drupal, social media, and also a store, and they're using Gatsby on the front end. But this is going to be like pretty similar to what we were talking about before. So what they need to do with this proof of concept site is deliver artist, like music artist information to all the fans that want to see it. And they all want really great experiences, and they all want to see it right away. So the architecture they're considering, or they're actually working with right now, uses Gatsby to pull in information from Drupal from their e-commerce site. And they're actually using Drupal kind of similar to what I was talking about before as an aggregator. And then doing the Gatsby build creates a static site that they can load in a CDN and then use the CDN network to push that out closest to their fans. The fans get that unified experience, being able to get access to all the information that the artist puts out, but maybe the artist isn't updating Drupal directly. Maybe the artist is updating social media, maybe they're updating things on YouTube. That's social, but it's a little different. Maybe they are sending information along with like the liner notes to their record label. All that gets pulled in, and it just looks like a great like front end user experience. Got some Gatsby love, that's awesome. So in this example, I don't have, the Gatsby is self-hosted, but I want to use this as an example to show you a little bit of like that aggregation that I was talking about earlier. So they're pull in data to Drupal from all those different sources: marketing content, email, YouTube, Spotify, ticketing. There's a few more. I made the slide too cluttered. And they're doing that through a series of migrations and through using JSON API, REST API, directly to Drupal, using Drupal to categorize and unify and sort the information. Then using Gatsby to really do the presentation layer. Gatsby is already also talking to their e-commerce platform. Do builds from Gatsby to Drupal to create the static HTML, which then they can load in the CDN. Good. So Gatsby itself will use GraphQL, and you can have it use JSON API. So GraphQL and JSON API both work a little bit differently. Let me see. Oh, gotcha. Okay. So just in terms of like, I thought I'd lay this out just because not everybody like looks at the caching layer, because GraphQL is great and it is an amazing structured query language. It will send a request usually to Drupal. Drupal builds the response and sends that directly to the front end. What we found, kind of like practically speaking, is it really helps if you're using GraphQL to add in caching as like a database caching layer. Like we use Memcache at Aqua, but Redis is similar. JSON API gives you the ability to cache in a front-end caching system like Varnish or a CDN. And what that allows you to do is the front end can go back to that fast cache, in this case like a Varnish cache, and that gets delivered quickly to the front end. If there's a unique JSON API request, it'll go to Drupal, that'll build a response, and then send it back to the front end. Drupal at Aqua, we use with the purge module, and so we set long cache lifetimes and use the purge module to purge individual assets in JSON API strings, so that when content's updated, that asset is updated right away in Varnish and then the front end caching systems and is accessible to the front end layer. Cool. And then JSON APIs in core, which is great. And Varnish caching is just a matter of enabling caches. So we don't have to do anything separate or different to enable Varnish caching. For JSON API, you just have JSON API enabled, and then you go to the performance settings and you set your cache lifetime. And just kind of like charted this out to show you a little bit of what that can do for you. So this is we're just looking at it from the Drupal stack perspective. It's a little confusing because we use a bunch of software on our Drupal stack. But the total number of requests is like the top left corner, purple. And you can see there's a lot of requests that come in for a build. If you are using JSON API, you can send a lot of those to Varnish and have a fewer number of requests that are actually going to Apache and Drupal. And that reduces the load that you have on your database layer. So MySQL, and then also pulling from Memcache. So practically speaking, it means you can do a lot more with less of like a hardware spend. So the JSON API, as like that part, is kind of like static, like it builds the file and then it can be saved in Varnish. But then if you make a change to a node or a content on your Drupal site, you can use the purge module and the right plugin and clear that out as soon as you need it to. And it depends a little bit on how you build that front-end application. So, okay, that's a good point. I should go through the numbers. So in terms of total requests on these graphs, they're talking about 30,000 requests is kind of like the peak. That's the top line. For over 15 minutes, you can send about, in this example, about 20,000 at peak. Average more like 10,000 was sent to Varnish, which means that you have occasional peaks up to 20,000 requests to the Drupal, but your average peak's a lot lower. And yeah, GraphQL can include caching. And that also just means that the number of requests to SQL are a little lower. So enabling, I talked a little bit about this before, but this is just kind of reviewing. JSON API is included in core, you can just enable it. I mean, it really is kind of that simple. Setting a cache lifetime, if you're already using a front-end cache like Varnish, it's pretty easy. It's the purge module and the plugin that works for your host or caching system to clear that front-end cache when content's updated. It's really helped the projects that I've worked on to remove access to unneeded files and API. The JSON API extras modules have been super helpful for that. And then that project that I'm talking about is mostly, you're using Varnish usually with anonymous traffic, or if you're doing something like securing all of the traffic. So in this project, all of this traffic could come in and is handled by Varnish because the Drupal is only delivering content to Gatsby. The access control is actually handled in through allow and deny lists. And then there's another way you can do it, which is push the authentication to the edge. And that is what this next project I'm going to talk about does. It's an event platform. It's like the event platform we're using right now, except it is built in React and it has a Drupal backend. And it's completely closed system. All of the traffic is authenticated. And it was built to be a trusted, secure place to host events for a particular company and save progress, like through videos and certification programs and learning programs. Drupal is also used to manage media, digital assets, shareable assets with the site visitors during events. So it's really important on this one that the front end is turning away and handling live events, and the Drupal is being used to update and add information. So this one's just a lot more complicated in terms of this diagram, and it is going to be too small and blurry, and I'm so sorry. So I'll just walk you through it. Basically, when the site visitor comes in, there's an initial request to the CDN, and assets that don't require a login are just delivered right away. Then they get to the front end of the application. They need to log in to be able to access any information. That's handled through Giga, so it's in the browser, and then it logs them into not just the platform site, but the whole network of sites that company uses, which is really handy because it gives them that seamless experience through the entire network of sites. Then once they're logged in, they usually go to like a main page, like a landing page or a set of pages, very similar to this hop-in platform that we're in right now. And there's a chat that runs through and grabs usually also a little headshot or icon of their image that they loaded. They're all talking to each other. Those are delivered, that's delivered through the embedded video platform. So that's actually a separate system that's also interacting with this front end site. For everything that has to go back, has to do with the individual's consultant's progress or something that's like specific to them. There's also like a Drupal request that goes back to the Drupal layer. And then also for some of the pages, menus, and assets, that goes back to the Drupal layer. I call it the Drupal layer, but it also includes the Varnish Cache, which is really helpful in terms of delivering that content quickly. I'm going to get to that Lyft question later. So on this particular platform, because it is a live event platform, it's pretty quiet until you suddenly have a whole lot of people logging in at once. So it's been really helpful for this one. And in addition to having like Varnish Cache, is also have a front end cache and an external CDN to really deliver some of the like smaller assets right out to the edge layer. It's also the project where we learned that it is very important to be careful about what you're using to vary in that CDN. In an early part stage of this project, we accidentally set it to vary by user, and then had a 10,000, like 7,000 user actually in that case event, and our caching layers exploded on the front end. The varying by user was not a good idea. So double check what you're using to vary. It is really important to get that right, especially before you deliver a bunch of traffic to it. Also, if you're doing handling varnish through like a balancer layer like we do at Aqua, if you're caching all the assets and you're caching JSON API on top of it, that can be a big level. Like, that can be a lot to cache. So make sure you beef up the balancer layer. It is really amazing what those caching layers can do. They can really speed the delivery of assets, but sometimes they can slow everything down. And also JSON API extras is great. Perch works really well. This is just looking, because I promised failures, right? This is looking at an actual real life failure that happened with this event site. And what we did, this is one of those where we did not have the balancer layer beefy enough. So our Varnish Cache was not on big enough hardware. So what we see on this is that the front end stack, the node stack, has this really smooth like ramp up in requests per second. And then all of a sudden, the CPU just starts spiking. That's when that front end stack was trying to get to the back end stack, and the back end stack, that caching layer was just busy. It's had too many requests coming in at once. And even the IO, like even the requests coming in and the requests coming back was just too fast, too much for it to handle. So what happened was that CPU went to the sky. So in this case, it didn't break the front end site at all. It did cause for new users to not be able to log in as quickly as they wanted to. But you can see what's happening with like CPU and memory. And then when that tailed off is actually getting close to the end of the event and the number of people logging in actually tails off. And you can see the load kind of like checking up and down at the same time. So this is not how you do it. So what would you do? So I was thinking about like, what is the best advice to try to give people if they're trying to prepare for this kind of traffic where it all comes in? We know that everybody tries to log into an event at the last possible minute. But what are things that you can do to help prepare for something like this? I think number one, if you're using Drupal, make sure you're optimizing your Drupal caching strategy. And by that, just like make sure, check through your views, check through the way the site's built, make sure that like the basics are covered, that you're using good caching. Also take a look at your assets and just make sure that they're a size that can be delivered, like images and PDFs and all those things can be delivered quickly and easily to the front-end consumer. Audit your entities and fields where it's possible. Disable access or turn things off. If there are places, if you know a traffic event's coming and you have some seldom used APIs, go ahead and just shut it down. Features you don't need, shut them down. Because the last thing you need is to be like in a high traffic situation and have somebody like trigger something resource intensive on the site. Using CDN, upsize your balancer, load test, cache warming, and then I don't have on here, and I should, the JSON API extras, but it's really great. And then also the Drupal.org, if you look in the JSON API documentation, there is security consideration document that's really great. If you just run through everything in the security considerations document, you're in a really good spot for handling traffic. The other thing that I thought was like a good solution, so this is the same setup, right? It's the event site, and node stack in the Drupal stack. And it's actually very similar to let's see, which one is this? This is actually more users logging in than the last one, but we're able to keep the CPU and everything under control. And we did that with a combination of really going through and dialing in the caching strategy. Also upsizing, what hardware we had. And then also they did a really good job of incentivizing people to join the event sooner. And what that did was it lowered the peak. It lowered the maximum number of requests. So you could actually handle that, a larger volume of site visitors by spreading out the data platform. Cool. Anyway, I thought that was a really great idea. So think of too, like, as you're going through this situation, sometimes like the answer is technological, but sometimes the answer is like social. And if you can incentivize people to do a behavior that helps your website, like that can be good too. That's the end of like my pre-done part of my talk. It looks like we have just a few more minutes, and there are a lot of great questions, and I have really been appreciating how you guys have answered questions for each other through here. That's all amazing. So to get to Steve's thing, the way that you would move authentication to a browser is by using like a single sign-on solution. Gigia has one, and there are others that will allow you to manage the sign-ons through like JavaScript in the browser layer. So you can, if you have authenticated users, you're really in that situation where the front end caching layers won't work for you, and you really have to look at back end caching. Like, what are ways that you can improve that database performance? It's like Memcache is one of them, Redis is one of them. Being able to like spin up new pods might be, probably not actually now that I think about it, but basically you're taking that same kind of performance problem, you just have shifted it to a slightly different place. With content localization and translation, you often have like a vary by country. So if you can vary by country, then that opens up, it's almost like a different cache bucket, and you pull information out of that cache bucket. I think that is like the simplest approach that's been like workable that I've run into. Other solutions haven't worked as well, because sometimes if you aren't like properly setting that cache ID or that vary by in a country specific way, what I've seen in real life is like translated content accidentally being shown to users instead of English content, or the other way around. So with the you can vary by country in the CDNs. That's one way to handle it. Another way to handle it is to double check that the cache ID that Drupal is using is actually enough of a different cache ID, and then also that is bubbling up in Drupal and then bubbling up into your external caching layers. It's a little esoteric, but hopefully that makes sense. Cool. Yeah. Alejandra Cordova just gave, the same answer I did, so yay. So you can have external applications consuming JSON API endpoints. So you could version the API, I guess. You could version the API. You could use cache, right? And then you're just using purge to like clear the cache, and that updates the specific object if it's just specific object information. If you want to add a new feature or data model, I don't know that as well, but I'm hoping somebody else in here knows. There might be an answer to with the JSON API extras, or being able to change the path to the specific thing you're calling. I think that's just about everything. I think I'm running out of time. It's been really great talking to everybody. Oh, so Aqualift works in it's JavaScript and in the front end. So the really important thing when you're working with decoupled architecture and Aqualift is just to make sure that you're able to include the lift code. And then you might have to do some, when you create a slot, it's a position for customization, it's called a slot in Aqualift, which is now being called Aqua Personalization, just to make sure that the slots that you're going to be using are included. And then make sure that you're using, with the other tool, you're setting position information that'll match the slot. And those are the key parts to kind of have all working together. And we are happy to help you figure that out in detail. Right. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate all of you.